All right, hello there. Welcome to episode 3 of the Educate Me podcast. My name is Kelly Berry, and this is again for my Changing Majority class. This week we had a few prompts to read. The prompts were based on articles that we had to read. We had to pick 2 articles from the files, and the 2 that I chose to talk about and read and discuss whatever are the first one titled Addressing Diversity on College Campuses, Changing Expectations and Practices in Institutional Leadership, and the second one I chose was waiting for it to load, sorry. Multicultural Education in America, Melting Pot Atonement, or At One Mint. So these were the articles that I chose to read, and I wrote some notes, so excuse me while I click back and forth between tabs and whatnot. Let me actually pull up the questions. Okay, so the questions that we had about these articles, or we had the purpose of the articles, the arguments presented, the class, was research conducted, and if so, how was it conducted and who did it include? And how does the article contribute to your understanding of diversity and multiculturalism? So, also, I'm sorry, I'm going to apologize ahead of time. I am completely exhausted. I'm a dance major, and we have a full residency this week, which is 6 hours of dancing straight. So I'm exhausted, and I had rehearsal after that too. So if I sound tired, I am. So please excuse me for that. So the first article, this is the college study, addressing diversity on college campuses. And the purpose of the article, basically, they summed it up in the introduction, the abstract. And this is a quote from that. It says, the expected outcome is the creation of opportunities for underrepresented minorities so that all students can reach their greatest potential. So I really took that as like, they're trying to make curriculum inclusive, make the people who teach the curriculum inclusive, and really like make people feel welcome in college, basically. So getting into the arguments presented, this college study, I have a bunch of bullet points, so excuse me for reading, but here we go. This is also a quote, I think. As the population in the United States continues to become more diverse, the need for a workforce that can respond to these changing demographics is becoming more pressing. They talked a lot about affirmative action and how that is a good thing to do, but there's been a lot of resistance because of this claim of the policy being racist towards white people, which is a whole other conversation that you can get into. But basically, that's why, like, this kind of poses a problem because a lot of people, or a lot of institutions and universities don't feel comfortable actually implementing affirmative action because they're scared of the backlash. And unfortunately, that is the case because affirmative action has done a lot of good and can do a lot of good for minority students. So they also talked about how it's not enough to just bring together a diverse group of students. obviously it's an important first step, but we need to be aware that minority students generally don't want to assimilate to majority culture. So it's really important to acknowledge minorities' culture and like bring that onto college campuses and bring it into like teaching methods and basically just generally making them feel included in college space. And a diverse faculty adds to that, because if you just have like a bunch of old white dudes trying to teach you about Black culture, like obviously that doesn't work. I mean, it can work, but you're not getting like it coming from someone who's experienced it, you know? So it's different. And then again, you also get into this weird place of students not feeling included, because with that same example, if you have an old white guy teaching a young Black girl about Black culture or like Black women in the United States, they don't have any experience in that, but this Black woman in class does. And so it kind of maybe feels a little bit patronizing or demeaning. What's the word I'm looking for? Basically, it's like not right. Like as educated as that person, as that white man may or may not be on the topic, it still just doesn't feel genuine coming from someone who hasn't experienced it firsthand. So basically having diverse faculty adds new ideas and approaches to teaching. And this was one of the studies that was done, was one showing the value of like having minority teachers and them like really bringing in values of empathy and respect for others, and also using classroom experiences to impact society outside of the classroom. Also, the lack of recognition by the institution makes progress difficult, because a lot of the times you kind of end up seeing minority faculty members being tokenized rather than truly valued. So that's not good either. Because if you're just like bringing in minority faculty to like add clout and like attract students, you know, these people like don't really get rewarded for the work that they're actually doing. They just are told like, oh yeah, you're good, stick around because we need you, you know. It's kind of fucked up. But yeah, so one thing that they were saying we should try to implement is they call these 3 standards for encouraging true campus diversity. That was how I wrote it in my notes. I don't think that's a quote. But the 3 standards was one of the things. Sorry, I'm like in a random room in my apartment. So one of the first standard is developing trust and engaging individual cultures. So sometimes it's hard for minorities to trust that universities have their best interest at heart, and that they're not just, same as the faculty, just like bringing them in to make the university look better. And also evaluation of professors based on how they nurture positive relationships with students, which is often seen in minority faculty over like the old white guy who teaches science, you know. No offense to that guy, because he probably has that job for a reason, but you know, there's a lot of value in forming actual relationships with your students that are like meaningful and helpful. So the second standard they have is developing new admissions and hiring policies. In addition to simply diversifying numbers, like I said before, training and increasing knowledge of campus faculty and staff on the topic of diversity. So really like giving teachers and professors an education in this multiple cultures rather than just their own even. Like you can have, let's say, a young Indian woman. She doesn't know anything about Black culture. Not necessarily, maybe she does, but you know, it's really like teaching faculty all of the cultures as best as we can. A big, huge point on that is diversity at all levels and all departments. But all levels really being a big one because, as we know, it's very common to see lower level positions, let's say starting from the bottom, like a janitor or something, in as minorities, and then professors are, you know, it's better than like higher level administration or deans or whatever the case may be. So really getting that diversity at all levels of the institution and in different departments too, I think is important, because I think a lot of the times things like liberal arts or arts I don't know, English, things like that end up being a lot more diverse than things like maybe sciences or math, that kind of stuff. So it's just a thought. Another one on here that they have is adopting a formal policy similar to the University of California's academic personnel policy, which encourages retention, tenure, and promotion of minority faculty, which is very important, obviously, as we've discussed. And then the third standard is introducing diversity into universities through a systematic approach. And this kind of just sums up the other two pretty much, but a big one is institutions that incorporate diversity into the framework of their organizations are more likely to be successful in institutionalizing diversity as part of the overall culture. So basically, if you're seeing more diversity in schools, colleges specifically, higher education, that kind of thing, then you're going to see it in higher business and engineering and whatever else, you know, like you're going to see that out in the real world more if you see it more in college. And then instructional leaders should view diversity as a positive social force that enhances student learning outcomes to facilitate cross-racial interactions. So really like bringing together people on campus and encouraging that, not just like adding more people for the sake of adding more people, like really bringing those people together and teaching them about each other. And yeah, it's really important stuff. So how does the article contribute to your understanding of diversity and multiculturalism? I wrote out this little blurb because it was right after I read it, and it was kind of like what I was feeling after reading that. So I said, as a white person, there are a lot of things that I don't think about, especially in terms of minority students not feeling welcomed or included in a college community. Faculty feeling excluded or underappreciated doesn't surprise me at all, because we hear about that in every working industry, and teachers and professors are underappreciated and underpaid as is, regardless of race or gender. But because of where I live and have grown up and how I have been raised, I don't often consider that minority students may often feel out of place in a college setting. Excuse me. So basically, like, a lot of this, like, I personally don't really think about because I don't have race as a factor in my personal life. Excuse me. Obviously, I feel the effects of being a woman in society and definitely have experiences on that front. But race is something that I don't often think about because I've grown up in an area that is so diverse and multicultural and accepting and welcoming. So it just like doesn't feel like something that I've ever taken into consideration because I've never really experienced it. And I myself have been someone who is welcoming and open to all kinds of people. So I don't have that personal experience of feeling excluded because of that. But I know, obviously, because I haven't personally witnessed it, doesn't mean that it doesn't happen in this area. Like, yeah, this is a really fantastic place to be as a minority, but it's still not perfect and it's still flawed. The whole system is flawed. So there's obviously still a lot of work that needs to be done. But yeah, from my personal understanding, this article, study, whatever, really kind of helped put things into perspective there, of like how minority students don't always feel welcome in such a whitewashed institution. So yeah, that's kind of my summary for that one. Sorry, my computer is freezing up a little bit. Excuse me, oh my god. Alright, well, I'm just gonna keep going. I don't know why the video is frozen on my laptop. Hopefully it's not frozen on the recording, because that is not a cute face. Alright, we're just gonna keep going. On to the next article. This is the classroom essay. What is it titled? Going back to this. Multicultural Education in America, Melting Pot Atonement, or At One Mint. Cute little play on words there. So this actually, there are a lot of parallels in this essay as there are in the college study. And reading through it, there kind of seemed like it repeated itself in a lot of ways, that it was beautifully written and a lot of interesting wordplay and that kind of stuff, but it definitely kind of dragged on a little bit more than I think it needed to. Basically, kind of like elegantly summarizing what, like, a similar points to what's in the college study. But what I wrote for the purpose of this article was to encourage the education system to include more multicultural education into everyday school curriculum in order to create a more inclusive learning environment for multicultural students. So the arguments presented that I have written, I actually copied a lot of quotes in here because there were a lot of things that really kind of got me while I was reading it. So the first one that I actually kind of had a question about was what is culturally valid for, let me start over. Quote, what is culturally valid for one may be vapid cult for another. So I was kind of wondering if that was something like, I don't know, like the use of the N-word or something like that like one culture can do something whereas another culture can't. So I don't know, I kind of had a question about that, and obviously I'm by myself, so I may never get it answered, but yeah, I just wrote that one down. The second quote I have on here is, using the standard American way, teachers taught their cultures Teachers taught their cultures, the ones they knew best, to children from different backgrounds who melted into invisibility. So this was kind of on the topic of like the American melting pot, and how I've always thought of melting pot as kind of like a beautiful thing, that you're like melting these cultures together and people pick up things from one and learn things from another, and everyone just kind of like molds into this beautiful oneness. But they were kind of talking about how like the original meaning of the melting pot kind of ended up being like everyone needs to melt into the white cheese, if that makes any sense. Thinking of it like fondue, like a bunch of different cheeses come together, but like in the end the whole thing is going to be a pot of white cheese. Basically like melting these different people into white culture. I kind of like touched on that a lot in this article. But yeah, that to children from different backgrounds who melted into invisibility. That was one of those that I was like, oh my God, that's a rough one. So another one that I have on here is the child sensed early that his imported lifestyle was deficient, deviating as it did from all that was taught. Can an individual grow properly if his notions of self are obsessively distorted? I think that's kind of relevant to that same point of minority students just not feeling welcomed or represented or appreciated or any of that stuff when they come into pretty much any school. But obviously we're in college, so we're talking about college mostly here. But yeah, and then underneath that I also have, if the little child he once was does not grow up in an accepting setting that honors his feelings and pride, the adult he becomes may not be able to handle the responsibilities of an adult. So again, it's kind of that similar thing. Not feeling accepted, not feeling heard, any of that stuff. And then it gets this resentment and this bitterness to the rest of the world. Yeah, students don't learn and grow and they feel shamed into conforming, especially to a culture that they're not familiar with. Yeah. So I also have, every hour, 7,200 new people are born into a system into which they had no input. They will live with people in homes, schools, and neighborhoods that will render them markedly different from their peer culture. Again, same thing. I should probably stop reading these quotes because they end up just touching on the same points. A cultural heritage anchored in thinking that celebrates independence and uniqueness. I think that's something that's really important in every aspect of life, but I feel like right now we're kind of in a weird place of almost like making everyone trying to make everyone think the same things in the same ways. I feel like that's really prevalent in this part of the country and also in college institutions in general. It kind of feels like people are shamed into thinking a certain way or looking a certain way, acting a certain way. And some of that is definitely necessary, especially when it's things that are offensive or hurtful and that kind of thing. But sometimes I think we take it a little bit far, a little too far. And again, like if you even listen to the first episode of this podcast, I talked about how I'm someone who really likes to hear people out. regardless if I agree with them, because I just feel like everyone has their stuff, and everyone has a right to their own opinion. And who am I to judge someone for that? Unless it's hurting someone. But even then, I think a lot of times people don't know that they're hurting someone when they have opinions like that. Because a lot of people are just raised a certain way and they just literally don't know any better. So I give people the benefit of the doubt. I listen to their side, I listen to their story, and then I'll try to help them see what I believe is the right way. And if I say it in a positive enough way, then chances are more likely that they'll latch onto it. But if I immediately go on the attack and say, like, you're wrong, you're an asshole, you don't deserve to have that opinion, then people just get defensive and I don't know, nothing gets done. Yeah, so I kind of, backtracked a little bit there, but I think that goes for everything, really. And I like that cultural heritage anchored in thinking that celebrates independence and uniqueness. I like that a lot. Let's see. I have on here, I think this was a thought that I had while reading it. This article acknowledges that multicultural society does not come without conflict, but that it should be handled civilly and that we should have open discussions and conversations without making defensively grandiose, pretentious, and unrealistic claims. That last part was a quote. Yeah, and that's kind of exactly what I was just talking about when I got sidetracked. But I guess not sidetracked. Yeah, a multicultural society does not come without conflict because we have different cultures. We have people from different backgrounds with different opinions, different thoughts, different education, different upbringing. All that stuff all compiles into who we are as people as we grow up. And through adulthood and everything. If you're brought up a Catholic, you might end up being a Catholic for the rest of your life. And that's okay. And a lot of Catholic people are very, very good people. And even though someone like me, I'm agnostic, I don't believe in God as God, but I respect people who do. And even though I don't understand it and I don't believe it, I don't get it, that's not my thing, I'm not going to put anyone down for that. If you're a Catholic person who's a bad person, I'll put you down for being a bad person, but not for being a Catholic, because that's the part of your culture. Yeah, anyway, going back there. I already talked about that a lot on this so far. But yeah, that last little bit of that quote, that we should have discussions and conversations without making defensively grandiose, pretentious, and unrealistic claims. We don't have to get crazy. We just need to listen to each other. And yes, it's okay to feel strongly and to have opinions. It's okay and it's good, and we need to, because this world would be boring if we all didn't have opinions. But yeah, just listen to each other. How many times am I gonna say it? And then we have, let's see, I think this was also, yeah, so teachers need to know about and expose their students to as many different aspects of, Teachers need to know about and expose their students to as many different aspects of as many different cultures as possible. And that includes history, traditions, celebrations, ideologies, etc. And in doing so, students will feel more represented, celebrated, and educated. So from this, going to this, how does the article contribute to your understanding of diversity and multiculturalism? Again, I just wrote down my thoughts right after I read the article, and I said, I think I got lucky in that my schools growing up did a relatively decent job of educating us on many different cultures, relatively decent job of educating us on many different cultures as they could fit into the normal curriculum. However, definitely more could have been done, more can always be done. I think things are starting to change now, but for example, at least when I was in elementary school, we were still learning about the whitewashed version of Native American history. Maybe partly because we were still young and they didn't want to traumatize us, but I think it is still important not to lie to young kids about something so atrocious. Also, teachers can only give as much as they know, and unless they do a whole bunch of research outside of class on their own time and their own dime, they don't get all of the information they would need to be able to properly educate their students on other cultures. Yes, they could do this on their own, but they're already so overworked and underpaid, there isn't much time nor incentive for them to do so. And I know I talked about this a little bit in the last podcast, but just going back to how teachers just aren't appreciated in general. So I can't imagine how already underappreciated minorities must feel in those teaching positions. But yeah, I mean, there's I think that we need to help teachers learn also, because it's easy to just say like, oh, you need to teach everyone about everyone. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of cultures. That's a lot of time. That's a lot of work. That's a lot of energy. So I think that it's something that needs to be like built into the curriculum so that teachers don't have to feel the responsibility to do all of that research on their own, because that's a lot. But yeah, so I know I kind of rambled a little bit on this, and like I said, I think in my first one I have a really hard time just like sitting down and like talking about my own opinions and thoughts and to a camera. I don't do this on a normal basis, so I hope this is good. I hope this worked out. Yeah, that's pretty much my thoughts and my reflection, and I think we're done. Yeah, so see you next time. Bye.